So welcome to the webinar. This is Good Intentions, Bad Results, Why Conversations About Race Go Wrong in our series of bold conversations. We're just giving folks another minute or so to get logged in, get settled into their seats, find the chat box on the bottom bar of Zoom. And as we wait, I'll just invite you to try out the chat box and tell us where you are, who you are and where you're coming from. And just make sure that you've got our audio, you have the screen set up, move those dialog boxes around to where they're comfortable for you. And I will tell you the recording has started. So we will have this available for people to listen to in the future. What fun to see the wide variety of colleagues and friends, old and new, from local to the Minnesota area and across the world. See Costa Rica going by. And we'll start in a moment.
Should be muted.
All right, let's get started. Welcome to our webinar, Good Intentions, Bad Results, Why Conversations About Race Go Wrong. This is a collaborative effort between three of us who are practitioners in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. We are all local to the Minnesota Twin Cities area. But we want to start by just giving you a little short introduction of who we are. And in fact, to do that, we're not going to use video for most of the webinar, but just for right now, I'm going to go on. So if you want to scroll through the boxes of participants list, you can actually see me. My name is Joanne Larson. I'm the photo in the middle. And we came together as a result of another project that we were working on and wanted to bring this work to a larger audience. And so this webinar is the beginning of that and kind of an exploration of how to serve in new ways. And especially as we all transition to deeper and broader work in distance and telework, kind of a convenient time to be launching a webinar with three of us in different locations and you all across the world as well. So thanks for joining us today for that. Short bio about myself. I grew up in rural North Dakota, went to the East Coast for college, studied international relations, and spent my time kind of bopping around the world and got a teaching degree along the way and found myself really solidly in the place of training and transformational education for adults and with a desire to work on social justice. And it's moved into race and equity and diversity and inclusion work. I'm a certified coach, and I kind of bring all those pieces into the work that I do with Sparks of Change. I am joining you from central Minnesota. I moved to my parents' basement a couple of days ago in anticipation of a lockdown that would maybe drive me and my 2-year-old nuts if we were alone. So my parents are graciously providing daycare upstairs. And I'm hanging out in the basement along a beautiful lake and joining you for this work today. And I'll pass it over to Phyllis to introduce herself and welcome you all.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us. I am joining you from North Minneapolis. Shout out to the North Side here in Minnesota. And it's a gloomy day outside, but seeing all of you on this call is making it a very joyful day. And it's a precursor to my birthday weekend. My birthday is tomorrow, so thank you all for giving me the gift of your presence on this call today. I've been doing this kind of work in some capacity for over 20 years. For the last 14 years, I've been the CEO and founder of Pink Consulting, LLC, and Pink stands for Pursuing Intercultural Needs and Knowledge, where I do intercultural assessment, diversity training, and large-scale organizational development with organizations. And with that, I'll turn it over to Julia.
Okay, am I live? Hello, everybody. This is Julia Habday. I'm joining you today from my 13-year-old son's bedroom. You might see behind me, he's an avid sports fan. So this is my makeshift office for the foreseeable future, as my own office is closed right now during this era of COVID-19. In addition to being a mom of 4 kids, 4 wonderfully awesome kids, I have to keep reminding myself that as they're downstairs trying to complete their homework. I also work with Better World Partners, and Better World Partners is a group of, again, amazing women who have historically done work around organizational development with nonprofits and foundations. And I personally bring an intercultural lens to that work. I, along with Phyllis and Joanne, am a qualified administrator of the Intercultural Development Continuum. I also hold a certificate of diversity and equity from the University of Minnesota. And going on, I think, 12 years now, I am a racial justice facilitator with the YWCA Minneapolis. In addition to my professional work in this arena, I also volunteer in a number of community organizations, including the Facilitating Racial Equity Collaborative, the St. Joan of Arc Racial Equity Core Group, and St. Paul Public Schools. And I'm joining you today from St. Paul, Minnesota, again on this gloomy day, but happy to hear and see some happy voices. I'm going to now stop my video, but I'm going to continue to talk as we move into our first exercise together. When we present challenging content and facilitate conversations that may be uncomfortable, we often begin, oops, excuse me, having technical difficulties here. Uh-oh, my slides. I'm going to show you my slideshow again in the hopes that it stays where it should. Again, when we present challenging conversation, we often begin with a grounding exercise. Grounding exercises are important in the cultivation of a sense of self-awareness and are a way for us to firmly anchor ourselves in the present when we're feeling overwhelmed, like when our technology goes wonky on us and we're not expecting it. So today we not only anticipate a fruitful conversation, but we also want to acknowledge the nuttiness that we're navigating right now, right? We're all in spaces that we're not used to. Many of us find ourselves in an atmosphere of stress, maybe some anxiety, some fear. So today our grounding exercise will focus on gratitude. And research shows that practicing gratitude significantly reduces anxiety and depression. So today we hope this exercise will help us to continue to focus on the good in life now and give us the strength to do the hard work of change going forward. So wherever you are right now, I invite you to settle yourself in a relaxed posture. If you can, plant your feet firmly on the ground. Feel the support of your chair or the wall on your back. Take a few deep, calming breaths to relax and center yourself. And now let's take a full, deep breath in, breathing in positive energy, all that will lead to personal growth. And now a long, slow breath out, releasing all the negative. Feel yourself seated and present in this moment. Continue to breathe deeply as you let your awareness move to your immediate environment. All the things you can smell, taste, touch, and hear. And say to yourself, for this, for all this, I am grateful. As we continue to breathe deeply, we next bring to mind those people in our lives to whom we are close, our friends, our family, our neighbors, our colleagues. And again, say to yourself, for these, I am grateful. Now turn your attention to yourself. You are a unique individual, blessed with imagination, the ability to communicate, to learn from the past, and plan for the future. Say to yourself, for this I am grateful. Finally, turn your attention to today, to the people right here in this webinar. This is your learning community today. Phyllis, Joanne, and I are all grateful that you chose to spend your time with us today. We are grateful for the opportunity to be together, even virtually, and for the opportunity to do good work and to work toward change that brings justice to this weary world. We thank you for your attention and your effort. For this, we are grateful. And as we continue our deep, calming breaths, I invite you to bring your awareness back to the space you are. As you feel ready, slowly begin to move your body and open your eyes. And together, we can begin our bold conversation.
Thank you for that, Julia. I hope everyone can hear me. This is Phyllis, and I'd like to welcome you to just write in your chat box for us what brought you to this webinar and what you're hoping to gain. So if you just share with us in your chat box what brought you to this webinar and what are you hoping to gain. And for many of you, it might just be a little bit of, I'm caught up in the house and I just needed a distraction from everything that's going on in the world. But just share with us a little bit about what brought you here. Okay, I see someone is interested in facilitating conversations on race and equity, so you're in the right place. Others want to continue to learn and have multiple perspectives when being effective in this work. have some IDI practitioners on the line that's always looking for more development and more opportunities to engage across cultural differences. So thank you all for sharing that. We have some very common threads on what's bringing all of us together. And so we're going to share a little bit about what's bringing us together to have this bold conversation and what's informing our work. So why would a person like myself, who is the CEO and founder of her own intercultural company, hate talking about race? Well, this is a story all about how my life got flipped, turned upside down. And it literally happened that way. It wasn't until very recently, and I mean recently like Monday, that I realized why exactly I don't like talking about race. I was working on my book with my writing coach, and the traumatic experience emerged through some of her questions to me. It was my favorite high school history teacher. He decided and was very planful and intentional in teaching us a lesson on slavery with great depth and vivid imagery. And it was done with really, really good intentions. But the outcome, however, was detrimental to my growth and my development, and it truly traumatized me, literally. So imagine a 17-year-old, self-absorbed, who grew up in segregated Mississippi, oblivious to how racial times were, and I'm hearing these atrocities of slavery that I had no idea that people who look like me had gone through atrocities like that. So having partners in this work becomes critical because all of us have triggers, and they may not be as distressing as my experience, but even a mild stimuli under stress and in times of conflict can cause us not to show up or facilitate as our best selves. So today, our hope is that you're going to leave with really good information and one or two specific tools that's going to help you be more effective in talking about race at home, work, and school.
Phyllis, thanks for sharing that. And despite having worked with you for a couple of years, it shocked me when you first told me, oh, I hate talking about race, because I was looking to you as being a mentor in talking about race. So to hear what's underneath that for you is fascinating. And I find myself a little short of breath even just imagining what that was like. And it makes me think a little bit about my growing up. I mentioned I grew up in rural North Dakota. I didn't think about race. The whole town was white. There was some Native American populations. There's reservations around, but they didn't really interact with us. We didn't talk about them. We weren't taught about them in school. I was at least third grade before I had any sort of thought about race. And frankly, my thought was, I guess it's easier to be white. I guess I'm glad I'm white. And I don't even know what prompted that. I didn't really have anybody close in my network who was a person of color. And when I did, it was in college, and it was because they were international. So there still wasn't very much of a racial identity to myself. It was more of a national identity. And that's kind of how my career path moved along, was intercultural, working across obvious differences like nationality and language and ethnicities. And so I was thinking about cultures and the skills it takes to be competent in those ways. And then I got into a relationship with a guy who had been born in North Dakota, raised there. He was white, went to a liberal arts college, and it felt like we had so much in common. And we did, except we were constantly bumping into each other in daily life. There was conflict, there was stress, there was all these misunderstandings. Well, but that's not how it is for me. But that's not what I meant. But it hurt me, so you have to apologize. But my intent was this, and it was boggling my mind that I could sit at work and be effective with 65 plus countries that I was interacting with on a regular basis, and come home to my home culture and not be successful. And what finally occurred to me was that we were in an intercultural situation, that our personalities, our family and our home cultures, our ways of moving through the world were really different despite our skin and other demographics being very similar. And so a lot of that brought me to this work and brought me to some of the realizations of like, oh, we don't get trained on this stuff. We don't learn intercultural skills. We just sort of get what we get, and it's not often tied to the differences, let alone to who we are or where it came from. And in fact, if you think about to your workplace, it's often called soft skills. And my goodness, they are nothing but soft, right? These are the core essential skills to be effective across differences. I noticed how much race was not at all part of my story, and yet things were so different, even with me, like with people of my same race, where I thought things were similar. Thanks for sharing that, Phyllis.
Welcome. You know, society, you know, it makes sense to me, Joanne, that that would be your experience, because in society, and especially in the US, it's taboo to talk about race, and it can feel scary given the racial history and the current contention that's going on in our country. It makes sense that most of us tend to walk on eggshells around this topic.
Yeah, and the other thing that's reassuring, but also blows a little bit of a preconceived notion, is that just being a person of color doesn't make you an expert in race. And I realized that I held that belief for a while, especially as I moved into this work. And I think that's a huge problem, right? That sometimes white people can assume that, oh, well, you're a person of color, therefore you have all the answers, or you know how to talk about this, or you know how to be effective across racial lines, right?
Right. And nothing could, you know, be further from the truth, depending on who you're interacting with. You know, just as a white person having people of color as friends doesn't make you an expert or a non-racist, if that's even a word. And, you know, that's part of the problem, because it can keep us from truly hearing and learning and doing the work necessary across our racial differences. You know, all of the latest research in the field by Bennett, Hammer, and the late endearing Dr. Michael Page, we learn about differences just like we learn about everything else. We don't get it by osmosis. It really takes being intentional, and it takes the information also being developmentally where we are ready to be able to receive that information. So the fact is, it's really a skill set, and it's a skill set to invest in. And the great news about it is intercultural competence is totally learnable. And that's what we're going to share with you today. We won't be able to cover everything and many tips about talking about race, but we will share with you a little bit later in the webinar how we can make sure that we continue the conversation with you and make sure that you're gaining more skills to put in your toolkit to be more effective across those differences. So I'm going to shift immediately into one of the pitfalls in talking about race. One of the major pitfalls in having conversations about race is that we tend to use our own lens and identity to ground us in that conversation, when most often we don't even realize that we're doing that. And then the next step is, when we come up against something that's different, more oftentimes than not, we tend to judge other people's experience. The problem is very clear in these instances, and the solution is cultural self-awareness. I'd like to give you an example of one of the first kind of culture shocks and experiences that I encountered moving from Mississippi by way of Atlanta. I went to a historically Black college there, and then I moved to Minnesota. I got a fellowship to move here during the mid-90s, when the University of Minnesota was trying to recruit more Black educators to the state. And so, of course, I'm a person, I was told when I was recruited that Minnesota is a very friendly place. People are going to be very friendly to you. And so I trusted that. I had no reason not to trust it. And so I walked out into the world greeting people in that way, or so I thought. And so my greeting to people was, hello, how you doing? And I would actually physically stop my body in anticipation of a conversation. And what I often found the response was people would say, hey, how you doing back? But they would keep walking. And I was like, what is going on? What is the disconnect here? And after some observation, after talking it over with people who were from Minnesota, what I came to was it wasn't that people in Minnesota were being rude, that they didn't care about having a connection with me. It was that how you doing is just an extension of hello. And people really don't care to know that much about you. Whereas where I come from in the South, if you ask someone how you're doing, there's a cultural expectation that you're going to stop and you're really going to get into it and find out. Like, we're going to talk about how your mom and them and how auntie is doing and what's going on in church. And so that's one of the first pitfalls in talking about race, is that we tend to put our own experience as the center of those interactions.
So Phyllis, I'm going to jump in here because I had a situation recently where one of my friends was using her own cultural lens to judge another friend's experience. And this actually led to some miscommunication and probably could have been avoided if we had listened to you and not used our own cultural lens in communicating. So let me just set up the story for you. So I was at lunch with two friends, one friend, Taylor, an African-American woman, and another friend, Amy, who is white like me. And Taylor was telling us about her big move to a new home in a new neighborhood. And she was letting us know about moving in and how she was received in the neighborhood. And she said, as soon as the moving van was empty and out of the driveway, people started lining up to, quote unquote, meet the new neighbors. She said they had pies, they had cookies, they had cake, all in an effort to see who this Black family was that was moving to their neighborhood. And hearing that, Amy interrupted her and said, wait a minute, that's a neighborly thing to do. I always bring people baked goods when they move into our neighborhood. It's a way to show them that they are welcome. What's wrong with that? And Taylor replied, it's different for families like mine. And again, Amy persisted and said, well, aren't you overreacting? I'm sure that these are nice people who are trying to show you that they do want you there. They want you in the neighborhood and they're bringing you pie to show you that they care. And then Taylor answers her, did you just do that white lady thing and compare your experience to mine? And Amy just sat there, quiet. She started to talk, but you could see the wheels spinning in her head. And she said, did I just do that? So it's hard. It's hard for us not to center our own experiences, right? We want to be good. We want to do good for others. When our motivations are positive, it's really hard to wrap our brains around the fact that others might not receive our actions positively. We run into problems when our intent doesn't match our impact. And so the challenge is to remove our own cultural lens, to see that both experiences can be true. And if we enter into conversation from a place of centering our own cultural experiences as the right way, instead of using curiosity to guide our dialogue, we can continue to run into these walls of miscommunication. And Phyllis, I think you're going to introduce us to a tool that can help us in situations like these, right?
Yes, and we're going to get to that tool in just a minute. And so what I hear in your story, Julia, is about three things. Well, there's probably multiple things going on, but immediately there are three things or intercultural pieces that I pull out here in the pitfalls that happens when we talk about race, or when we stumble into having conversations about race, because a lot of times our conversations about race, they're not courageous ones, they're the kind of wobbly, stumbly ones that we don't intentionally try to get into. So I heard three things. One thing I heard was Amy assuming commonality and assuming sameness with regards to how you welcome neighbors. Two, I also heard Amy trying to convince others that her way of doing it was the right way of doing it, and possibly the only meaning that a person should give when neighbors bring food. And third, Taylor's pushback and what happened in Amy's interaction was pushing on Taylor's patience around this topic, and Taylor lost the opportunity in a way to be in dialogue with Amy versus be in monologue with her, which is what often happens when people of color try to explain a thing to a white person. And that white person is trying to find connections with people of color, good intention, and instead they end up unintentionally dismissing, denying, and minimizing the experience of people of color. Bad impact. And so it's these types of interactions across racial differences that requires us during these times to be more astute of our intercultural skills in building our intercultural relationships.
Thanks, Phyllis. And I'm gonna ask you to look at the chat box for a second and see if you want to add a little bit. Clinton had a request to speak a little bit more to the interaction of gender and race when we talk about viewing the world through a lens. What comes up for you with that in terms of those assumptions we make? Julia shared a story here with, you know, 3 women, but of course we're all constantly talking across male and female lines and transgender lines, etc. What else might you add in terms of when we talk about culture and different lenses and race and gender also being there? Are you on mute?
I'm sorry, was that I wasn't sure if that was rhetorical or if it's a real or if it's a real question that you'd like for me to
No,
address.
yeah, I wondered if there was anything more you wanted to add, because I know that all of this work is intersectional, and just as we
The,
think
the
about
only
the first pitfall, yeah.
Yeah, the only thing I would add, and it's not an only, it would be an and, right? Because first of all, let's just ground level set this. Every interaction is an intercultural interaction. Everyone, even with seemingly homogenous people. I'm married to a partner that on the surface, we look like we're the same race. When we speak, we have some of the same vernacular. We have many of the same values. But when it comes to us interacting and making decisions and how we engage in conflict, not only does race play a role, but our culture plays a role. And so with my partner and I, gender oftentimes plays a huge role in some of the lessons and some of the takes and messages that we both bring into any interaction with one another. So that's one thing in our short time together that I would just address about intersectionality and when gender is playing a role. And I would imagine the topic of bringing food could sway us to there being only one gender that would do that, or one group of people that would do that. So that's all I'll say about that at this point.
Thanks. Yeah, totally great topics for future webinars. And I think the whole key that we're highlighting here, right, and what I have been learning for myself is that it starts with being aware of myself. What is my cultural programming? What's my racial programming? What is my gender programming? Like, who taught me what about what the right way to be is? and then learning that other people were taught different things about what the right way to be is, right? So that work just really starts with being able to look in the mirror and see it. Sorry, there's a phone in the background that's going to keep going off. It's the landline of all things. So the phrase that we often use for culture is the way we do things around here, right? So the work really is to start figuring out, like, what are the rules that are invisible to you, and how do you start making them visible to yourself, right? So in a moment, we're going to talk about how we actually do this, how we can ask hard questions without offending somebody, asking them why they do it the way they do, right? Being curious, being respectful, and how to not shy away from naming race as a factor that might make a difference in the situation. But I do also just want to highlight for us that this is just the tip of the iceberg. It's just one little part of the skill set that we all need in order to be effective. In our work, Phyllis and Julia and I, both individually as well as when we collaborate, we address these fundamental skills. We start with self and a deep grounding of our own values, helping you get clear on what those are, naming your preferences, your styles. And then we work into building the skills to be more effective across that, right? To be able to step into those interactions with tools, strategies, and confidence, and knowing that we're going to make mistakes. So we also practice with you how to rebound when things go awry, right? So that's just a little snapshot of kind of how we work, what we do, but let's get back to what we actually do about this, right? What is the how of this work?
Thank you for bringing us back to that. So if we go back to Julia's colleague, how could they have used this tool that we are talking about, TRI, transparency, reciprocity, inquiry? How can we use this to maybe help dismantle the conversation? I heard recently, and I think it was a pastor who was saying it, that you get the privilege of having sight, because there's three kinds of sight that you can have. You can have no sight, you can have hindsight, and you can have foresight. And oftentimes with us in our intercultural interactions, sometimes the best we can do is have hindsight. And so being able to use hindsight as an opportunity to learn and grow. So if we were to use Julia's story that she shared earlier between some colleagues, between Amy and Taylor, how might each of them have used this tool to be more effective in their interactions with each other? So, transparency. Let's start with Amy first. Instead of assuming commonality in how you welcome someone to your neighborhood and trying to convince others that her way is the right way of doing it, maybe she could have used TRI, and it may have sounded something like this. Transparency. I want to understand how this is different for you. Reciprocity. When I bring food, I truly am bringing it to welcome my neighbor to the community. Inquiry. Do you mind sharing what your experience has been when people bring you food when you're new to a neighborhood? Transparency, reciprocity, inquiry. I know at first it can seem kind of clunky, but now this is a tool that I use. I know I use this tool every day in just my interactions across any type of relationships, whether I'm in the grocery store, whether I'm in business meetings, whether I am in conflict with my 21-year-old daughter who still lives at home. I am using this tool to help me really slow down in my interactions. So speaking of slowing down, Taylor's buttons got pushed quite a bit in that conversation. And so if Taylor had the tool TRI, how maybe could she have slowed down to engage Amy in a way to get her out of her place of commonality? T, for transparency. Maybe Taylor could have said something like, our experience is different, and I don't want to compete with you on this. R, reciprocity. I'd like for you to understand why it's different for me being a Black woman. And I, inquiry, do you think you can listen with compassion, because I would love to engage in this conversation with you. So who uses TRI? Because we could say in that instance that Amy should have been the one with the tool and the awareness. And in intercultural interactions, mutual adaptation is always best. So sometimes it comes down to who in the interaction has the skill to be able to slow that conversation down, because things like race can really hijack the conversation.
I really appreciate, Phyllis, how you talk about it being a way to slow down when we get triggered. And I think that that's the place where you lean into a formula, because it's hard to get your brain around organizing it unless you've got something to lean into, right? This is the kind of thing that you can print out and put on a sticky note on the corner of your computer monitor, or just have at a ready place so you're like seeing it more often. And you can even use it in really simple situations. If you just want to know about someone's name, I think, hey, Joanne, what an interesting name. I've never heard that before. My name is Ruth. It doesn't have a meaning besides coming from the Bible, but also from my great grandmother, but no real meaning. Where does your name come from? Does it have a cultural meaning? Right? So you can use this in any kind of way. Or that neighbor who is doing something really disturbing to you at an early or a late hour. You can use this formula to check in and get curious about what it is and open up the conversation. So we want to invite you all in the chat box. What is a situation where you can use TRI? And you can give us the specifics of it, or you can be real vague. But the whole point here is simply like, how could you actually apply this, right? Because we learn when we stop and actually reflect, synthesize, and begin to put it into action in our life. So I'd love to see in the chat box, a situation or a behavior or a particular person in your life where you feel like this could be a helpful tool that you could practice. Yep, I'm seeing the spouse, absolutely. Especially in these stressful days. Yeah, right? It's the like, oh, my temperature's rising, go to the tool and try something different. Oh, great. Someone who's already been using it. Excellent.
I see that one, Joanne, about being asked, a person that often gets asked where they're from and how that can be really triggering to them. And being able to ask someone where they're from using this tool really helps that be a less triggering, or sometimes people can even say it feels like a racial microaggression or an ethnic microaggression. It can really slow us down for things not to feel that way or not to have that impact.
Yeah.
Yes, and I'm seeing this to use it as a role model. I know as a parent, it's important to model this to children as we are trying to raise anti-racist children, right? And show them ways to communicate effectively across difference. Let's see.
Someone's asking, can one of us model the TRI with the "Where are you from?" question? So if that comes at you, how might you use it to reply?
Yeah. So to use TRI in asking someone where they're from, one of the ways that I might use this is, let's just say with Joanne, I might say, you know, uh, Joanne, when I am often comfortable with people, my vernacular can change, and people can often tell that I'm not from the Midwest. I am wondering, do you mind me asking where you're from? I forgot to say that I'm from Mississippi, so I would share that I'm from Mississippi originally and now live in Minneapolis. Do you mind me asking where you're from? There you go. Transparency, reciprocity, inquiry.
Yeah.
I hope that was helpful.
Yeah. And what's really helpful is that question is so, it is very triggering, and it's also really unclear because some people are trying to ask, where are you from? Which suburb in the Twin Cities are you from? Other people are trying to ask, where's your family from? What country influenced you? Where's your accent from? Where'd you grow up? Other people are really trying to say, why is your skin the color it is? Right? And so we need to be able to ask, what do we want to ask? Right? So this tool breaks it down so that you can be clear about asking it. But I think on the other way too, if somebody asks it to you and you find yourself triggered, you can go back and say transparency. So you're asking me this question of where I'm from. You know, for me, that can be a really vague question. And sometimes people are asking it for a wide variety of reasons, some of which can bother me. Reciprocity. I can get a little confused about why someone's asking that. So I just want to be clear. When I typically ask it, I'm trying to ask where you're from in the States. So inquiry, could you clarify for me, what are you looking for in an answer when you ask me, where am I from?
That was a great.
And someone in the chat box, do I need to ask TRI to ask where a person is from?
Absolutely not. I would say if you have something that works for you, we would be the last people to tell you to stop using a tool that works. This is just an addition. And whenever there are maybe some of those obvious cultural differences at play, this can help minimize people misunderstanding and misinterpreting each other.
Yeah. And my initial answer too was, there's no black or white answer here, right? No pun intended on the race, but that's the thing. Like the more that we get interculturally competent, the grayer the situations become, and the more it depends on the context. Between Phyllis and I don't need to use TRI to ask her where she's from anymore. Mm-hmm. Between new colleagues, I do. Between a person who's a participant in my training, I probably do. How well do we know? What's the level of trust? What's the level of trust to recover? For Phyllis to say, Joanne, when you asked me that, that really didn't land well for me. And let me tell you why. Would you be willing to listen, right? So it's all going to depend on the situation. And even amongst ourselves, Julia, Phyllis, and I, we've had some, like sort of before a training started, we were chit-chatting about things, and things came up where, and I said, oh, well, this, and this, and oh, and the actor is going to be Black. And I was like, I mentioned the actor was Black. Is that okay? And so I kind of turned to Phyllis like, is it okay for me to have said that? And she's like, yeah, but I never know either, right? And so I want to underscore that we're all kind of figuring it out, and that it all kind of always depends. And part of it is the practicing transparency and the bounce back of, what was that like for you? And then let me after the inquiry really listen, right, to find out. So what we're getting at is that this is really big work. It's really exciting. And in a moment, we're going to share one more tip about how to talk about race. But before we do that, I want to issue you a challenge and an invitation to come work with us. This is the work that we do every day, what we're modeling for you here. And when you work with us, you will experience a dramatic shift in your relationships, because we start with self-awareness and a frame of reference. And we help you figure out if that's working against you, and if so, how to get it to work in your favor. You will deepen and develop your skill set to talk about race, both initiating and responding, just as we were kind of modeling. We look at the experiences people of color have and white people have, and how we can use those to reach across and start positive change.
Mhm. Yeah.
I also want to be clear that you're not going to be entirely comfortable as you do this. This image here of the metamorphosis, right? There's not a lot of growth in the comfort zone, and there's not a lot of comfort in the growth zone. And yet you will be infinitely stronger for having committed to this, right? What we've given you here is a little snapshot of tools and strategies, but there is so much more. And this is really an invitation. It's a call to action to join us as a community member, and that we want to work with you. And so it starts by joining us for a no obligation 30-minute strategy session, during which you will clarify what you want for yourself as a racialized person in our world. And some of us, myself included, are sort of new to thinking myself in racialized terms. We will identify with you the challenges that are getting in the way of having authentic relationships across race, and we'll create a clear plan to reach your goals. That's the kind of work that we can do together. And Phyllis, you had an example of how this is showing up for some of your clients already. I just want to ask you to share that.
Yes, quickly. And as we've been on this call, I was just taking some more notes about it. I just got back about a week ago from working with law enforcement with Stanford University. And I had the opportunity to do 16 hours over the course of 2 different days, about a month apart, with their law enforcement officers. And one of the things that I knew that I had to be very aware of is, as a racialized person, me as a Black woman coming in to do diversity, equity, and inclusion training with police officers. Already there is history, most of it not good, and contention. So I found myself using TRI quite a bit, so that they knew where I was coming from. My intent was landing the way that I wanted it to. So I was using it quite a bit with them so that we could minimize our misunderstandings and judgments of each other. And after the training, many of them gave the verbal testimonial that this tool helped them understand and realize, one, is that they're not always in crisis, is that most of their work, it falls in a more of a conflictual zone versus a crisis zone. And two, having a tool like TRI gives them the opportunity to really slow down and be intentional about how they are able to build relationships in possibly what could be split-second moments. And so that's just one example of how this one tool that we've shared with you today can help impact your interracial relationships.
And what I love that you're underscoring there is that we are all continually learning. And that for me gets at we have to be intentional about trying to learn, right? What's at stake here is our ability to be effective. It's our ability to align our intention with our impact, and to learn how to recover when the impact wasn't what we had hoped for, right? Because if I don't invest in coaching and skill building, I don't perform as well. My teams don't perform as well. That results in lower inclusion, people not feeling as involved and valued, which research tells us leads to lower productivity. It leads to higher absenteeism, higher turnovers, and loss of all that entails, right? So what the opportunity here is for you to invest in your skill set, invest in your team skill set, and be doing your part around racial and social justice, right? So today we are offering the free slots for an intercultural strategy session, and you can email this email, info@sparksofchangetogether.com. It's where the emails for the webinar came from, the confirmation. We have 19, odd number 19 free spots open. So the first 19 emails that come through, you'll get a free coaching session with us. And I would encourage you to email immediately. We will take the first 19 and if there's an overwhelming demand, we'll figure something out, because this is the work we're putting into the world. So we'll leave the slide on for a second as you copy that down or you go back to your email confirmation. But I really want to thank you for being present for that. And I promised you one final tip. So I'm going to pass it to Julia to share that as we head towards closing. We're close.
Okay, thanks, Joanne. Right, so we do want to leave you with one final tip. And while it sounds simple, it actually is quite powerful when you fully embrace it in heart and in mind. So at Better World Partners, one of our core values is to strive for progress over perfection. And this is the key, folks. You don't have to get it right, but you have to be willing to try and then be ready to hear what comes back to you and to learn from it. And that is progress. Just try a thing.
That's really, really good. Thank you so much for that, Julia. You know, this webinar, especially during these times that we're in right now, it just really gives me great hope and strength that all of you signed on and you went above doing the right thing to do to truly invest in being more effective at work, at home, and at school in more meaningful and more effective ways. So we hope to hear from you soon. Stay healthy and be well.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. Julia, we just go back to the email address to show on the screen, and I put it in the chat box also. Thanks
There you
for
go.
joining, everybody.
Thank you.